How far would your kids go to protect each other? I found my 16-year-old son Josh in the principal's office in handcuffs with 2 cops and his English teacher looming over him. Your son is going to prison, Mr. Mitchell said. He's been impersonating a young woman online and sending me messages, trying to destroy my career because he failed his last essay. My stomach dropped as I stared at Josh, who looked exhausted but wouldn't break eye contact with his teacher. Josh, is this true? I asked. No, Josh said simply, because the profile isn't a young woman. It's a 13-year-old child and Mr. Mitchell has been flirting with her since January. The room went completely silent. That's ridiculous, Mr. Mitchell said, his face going pale. The profile said she was in college. No, it said she was in 8th grade at Jefferson Middle School. Her bio said 13 and loving life. I mentioned her age 5 times in our first conversation. The officer checked Instagram on his phone while Principal Nelson looked at the screenshots. This profile clearly states she's 13, the principal said slowly. There's even a 13th birthday post from January. You commented happy birthday beautiful with 3 heart emojis, Josh said. The officer read from the messages, his voice getting harder with each word. Mr. Mitchell, you wrote age is just a number, and you're so mature for 13. Mr. Mitchell's confidence crumbled. This is entrapment. He set me up. You sent shirtless photos to who you thought was a 13-year-old. Josh continued, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. You asked her to meet at your apartment. You told her not to tell her parents about your special friendship. My hands were shaking as I realized what my son had uncovered, and I felt bile rising in my throat. Now show them your messages to actual students, Josh said. Principal Nelson read more screenshots, his face paling with each one. These are messages to multiple freshman girls, 14 and 15-year-olds. Academic support, Mr. Mitchell said weakly, loosening his tie. At midnight? Calling them beautiful? Asking to meet privately? The officer asked, stepping closer to Mr. Mitchell. I could see something deeper in Josh's face, personal pain that made my maternal instinct scream that something worse was coming. And there's something else too, Josh said, and everyone turned to look at him. What do you mean? I asked, my heart stopping. Tell them about Sophia, Josh said to Mr. Mitchell, who went completely white and actually stumbled backward. I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Mitchell said, his voice going up an octave. Sophia is my twin sister, Josh said, his voice cracking for the first time. And Mr. Mitchell has been grooming her since September. The room started spinning because Sophia had been different lately, secretive, staying after school for study groups. Josh pulled out a pink phone I recognized as the one Sophia had lost months ago. He gave her a burner phone so you wouldn't find out. He's been telling her she's his soulmate, that she should wait until she's 18, that he's never met anyone who understands literature like she does. He's been meeting her during lunch in his locked classroom. The officer took the phone and started scrolling, his expression hardening with each message. Mr. Mitchell, these messages are extremely inappropriate. You're telling a 16-year-old you love her. She misinterpreted my mentoring, Mr. Mitchell said desperately, sweat pouring down his face. Teenage girls get crushes. You told her you dream about her, the officer read, his voice disgusted. You said you count the minutes until you see her in class. You bought her jewelry for her birthday. You described what you wanted to do to her when she turns 18. Where is Sophia now? I managed to ask through the lump in my throat. She's in algebra, Josh said. She doesn't know I took the phone. She's been too scared to say anything because he told her no one would believe her, that he'd fail both of us if she told, that he'd make sure she never got into college. She'll deny everything, Mr. Mitchell said, regaining some composure and straightening his jacket. Because nothing inappropriate happened. Josh is manipulating this situation and his sister. Call her in, Josh said. Ask her about the poetry reading where Mom thought she was at Sarah's house. Ask her why she's been throwing up before his class every day. Ask her about the bruises on her wrists. They called Sophia in and she froze in the doorway when she saw all of us, her face going white when she spotted the pink phone in the officer's hand, and I could see her whole body start to tremble. Sophia, Principal Nelson said gently, we need you to tell us the truth about your relationship with Mr. Mitchell. Mr. Mitchell smiled warmly at her. That teacher smile that says you know the right answer. The same smile that had fooled all of us. Tell them, Sophia, he said softly, his voice like honey. Tell them the truth about our friendship. Tell them how I've only ever helped you with your writing. Josh reached for his sister's hand, but she pulled away, staring at Mr. Mitchell with an expression I couldn't read, tears starting to stream down her face. They have the phone, Josh whispered to her. They've seen everything. You don't have to protect him anymore. You don't have to be scared. Mr. Mitchell's smile never wavered, but his eyes were cold. Sophia knows nothing inappropriate happened. Don't you, Sophia? You know I never touched you. Sophia looked at me, then at the officers, then back at Mr. Mitchell, her whole body shaking now. Her mouth opened, then closed, like she was drowning in air. Sophia? Josh said, his voice breaking. Please, Soph, tell them the truth. Her mouth opened and closed again. Then she whispered so quietly we almost couldn't hear it. He said he loved me. The words hung in the air for a second before she collapsed into sobs that shook her whole body. Josh caught her as her knees gave out, and I rushed over to hold both my kids while the officers looked at each other with grim faces. Mr. Mitchell started backing toward the door, but one of the officers stepped in front of him. The other officer knelt down next to us and said we needed to take separate statements from the twins. He helped Sophia stand up while Josh supported her other side. They walked us to different rooms and my hands were shaking. So bad I could barely sign the consent forms they put in front of me. I kept looking between the two doors, wanting to be with both my kids at the same time. Through the window, I could see Principal Nelson on the phone with District HR, his face getting redder with each word. The officer with Mr. Mitchell was reading him his rights while he kept demanding his union rep and saying this was all a huge misunderstanding. Another officer came in with evidence bags and started putting the pink phone in one bag and Josh's laptop in another. I caught glimpses of the messages on the screen before they sealed everything up. Mr. Mitchell had been telling my daughter she was special and mature and different from other girls. My stomach turned and I had to sit down. A detective arrived about 20 minutes later and introduced himself, explaining this was now a criminal investigation. He said there could be charges for child endangerment and sexual misconduct with a minor. He scheduled formal interviews for the next morning at the station. While he was talking, I pulled out my phone and called Sophia's pediatrician to get an immediate appointment. The receptionist heard the panic in my voice and said they could see us in an hour. I also asked for a victim advocate because every protective instinct in my body was screaming to get my daughter help right now. Through the office windows, I could see students gathering in the hallway as word spread about what was happening. 2 officers were walking Mr. and Mitchell out in handcuffs, and kids had their phones out filming everything. I knew this would be all over social media within hours, making everything harder for Sophia. The detective gave me his card and said to bring both kids to the station at 9 tomorrow morning. We left through a side door to avoid the crowds. At the pediatrician's office, the nurse took us straight back to an exam room. The doctor was gentle with Sophia, documenting the bruises on her wrists and asking about her weight loss, and the throwing up Josh had mentioned. Sophia could barely speak but nodded when the doctor asked if she'd been having trouble sleeping and eating. The doctor took photos of the wrist marks and made notes about everything. She gave us a referral to a therapist who specialized in helping kids who'd been groomed by adults. She also gave me a list of warning signs to watch for over the next few days. The drive home was silent except for Sophia's quiet crying in the back seat. Josh sat next to her, not saying anything but keeping his hand on her shoulder. That evening, after I'd made dinner that nobody wanted to eat, Josh finally broke down. He told me he'd noticed Sophia acting weird months ago, staying after school when she didn't have activities and lying about where she was. He followed her one day and saw her going into Mr. Mitchell's classroom when nobody else was around. That's when he decided to create the fake profile because he knew nobody would believe a student's word against a teacher everyone loved. He'd spent weeks gathering evidence, taking screenshots, documenting everything. His voice cracked when he told me how scared he'd been that he was wrong, that maybe he was misunderstanding what he was seeing. But then Mr. Mitchell took the bait with the fake 13-year-old profile, and Josh knew his instincts were right. Sophia hadn't touched her food and disappeared into the bathroom, locking the door behind her. I could hear the water running, but nothing else. I sat on the floor outside the door, telling her through the wood that I loved her and none of this was her fault. I told her she was brave and strong and we would get through this together. Josh paced up and down the hallway, his face twisted with guilt. He kept saying he should have told me sooner, should have done something different. I told him he probably saved his sister's life, but he just shook his head and kept pacing. After an hour, Sophia finally opened the door. Her eyes were red and swollen and she looked so small and broken. She let me hug her, but her body was stiff like she couldn't really feel it. I tucked her into bed like she was 5 years old again, sitting on the edge of her mattress and stroking her hair until she finally fell asleep. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and the detective's name lit up the screen at 11:30. I stepped into the hallway to take the call, and he told me they'd found messages to at least 6 other girls, all freshmen or sophomores, dating back 2 years. He needed my permission for Sophia's formal interview tomorrow morning, and warned me this was turning into something much bigger than a single inappropriate relationship. My hands shook as I signed the electronic consent form he sent while still on the phone. After hanging up, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and started typing an email to Principal Nelson requesting every attendance record, grade report, and schedule change for Sophia since September. Something in my gut told me there were patterns we'd missed. Times she said she was at drama practice but was actually somewhere else. Days she came home late claiming she had tutoring. The cursor blinked as I added a request for any disciplinary records or teacher comments about her behavior changes. Josh appeared in the doorway holding his phone, his face pale in the blue screen light. He sat down next to me and started scrolling through Instagram and Twitter, showing me post after post from kids at the school reacting to Mr. Mitchell's arrest. Some girls were sharing stories about weird comments he'd made, how he'd stand too close during discussions, or send late-night messages about assignments that felt wrong but they couldn't explain why. One sophomore wrote that he'd asked her to stay after class alone multiple times, but she always made excuses because something felt off. Another girl said he'd commented on her photos from summer vacation, calling her beautiful and saying she looked older than 15. The posts kept coming, each one making my stomach turn more. Josh screenshot everything, creating a folder of evidence while tears ran down his face. I couldn't sleep after that, just lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about all the signs I'd missed. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and went into Sophia's room where she was sleeping fitfully, tossing and turning with little whimpers. Her backpack was on the floor and I carefully unzipped it, looking through notebooks and folders for anything that might help the case. In her English binder, tucked between vocabulary worksheets, I found folded papers covered in handwriting I didn't recognize. The poems were about desire and longing, using words like forbidden fruit and counting days until freedom, and describing physical yearning in detail that made me sick. One poem talked about a girl turning 18 and finally being able to love freely. Another described secret meetings and stolen touches. The writing was sophisticated, adult, talking about her body in ways that made me run to the bathroom and throw up everything in my stomach. I sat on the bathroom floor shaking, those papers spread around me, realizing how deep this went. Morning came too fast and Sophia woke up screaming from a nightmare, thrashing in her sheets until I held her tight. She couldn't stop crying at breakfast, her whole body shaking when I put toast in front of her. The panic attack hit when I mentioned getting dressed for school, and she started hyperventilating, clutching her chest and gasping that she couldn't go back there, couldn't walk those halls, couldn't see his empty classroom. I called the school's attendance line and told them she'd be out indefinitely for medical reasons, while Josh rubbed her back and said he wasn't going either, that his sister needed him more than he needed calculus. The victim advocate called at 9 to confirm our appointment at the police station, and I helped Sophia into the car, her movements slow like she was underwater. At the station, they led us to a small room with soft chairs and tissues on every surface. Adriana Carney introduced herself gently, explaining she'd be there just to support Sophia through the interview. The detective came in with a recorder and Sophia started talking in a tiny voice, describing how Mr. Mitchell first approached her about special tutoring for advanced students in early September. She said he told her she had rare talent, that her writing showed maturity beyond her years, that he could help her get into any college she wanted if she'd let him mentor her privately. Her voice cracked when she described the first time he touched her hand during a writing conference, how he'd held it too long while looking into her eyes and telling her she was special. The grooming had been slow and careful, building trust over weeks before anything inappropriate started. Josh gave his statement in a different room while I waited in the hallway, pacing back and forth. Through the door's window, I could see him at the table, laptop open, walking the detectives through every screenshot and fake profile detail. He showed them how he'd used publicly available information from the school directory to make the 13-year-old's profile believable, how Mr. Mitchell had initiated contact within hours of the profile going live, how eager he'd been to meet despite the clear age indicators. The detective took notes while Josh pulled up message after message, his voice steady but his hands shaking. The forensic tech joined them and explained to me later that they could recover everything from the pink phone and Mr. Mitchell's school computer, including deleted messages and browsing history. She said they were building a timeline showing his communications with multiple students over the past 2 years, tracking patterns of behavior and escalation. The evidence was overwhelming, she said, with thousands of inappropriate messages and searches that showed clear predatory intent. Principal Nelson called while we were still at the station, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. He said they'd started reviewing security footage from the past semester and had already found 12 instances of Sophia entering Mr. Mitchell's classroom during lunch periods when the door should have been locked. The timestamp showed she'd stay for the entire 45-minute period, and cameras caught Mr. Mitchell checking the hallway before closing the door behind her. More footage showed him walking her to a side exit after school, his hand on her lower back, guiding her to avoid the main hallways where other teachers might see them. Brandon Velez from the district attorney's office met us in the station's conference room after the interviews, spreading files across the table. He explained that they'd be filing multiple charges including sexual misconduct with a minor, providing obscene material to minors and abuse of authority. He felt confident about the case but warned us that Mr. Mitchell's defense would try to discredit Josh's sting operation as entrapment and paint Sophia as a troubled teen, making false accusations for attention. The legal process would take months, he said, with depositions and hearings and eventually a trial unless Mr. Mitchell took a plea deal. He gave us his card and said to call any time, day or night if we remembered anything else or if Mr. Mitchell tried to contact us through anyone. My phone started buzzing before we even made it to the parking lot, and Zoe Stevenson's name showed up on the screen, the school counselor I'd only met once at freshman orientation. She said she'd been trying to reach me all afternoon and needed to talk about support services for both twins, explaining that 3 other students had already asked for meetings after hearing about Mr. Mitchell's arrest spreading through the school like wildfire. I pulled over in the parking lot to write down the resources she was listing while Josh and Sophia sat silent in the back seat, both staring out opposite windows. Zoe mentioned trauma counselors who specialized in cases like this and gave me numbers for support groups, saying she'd already cleared both kids' schedules for the rest of the week if we needed time. That night, after forcing down some takeout nobody really wanted, Sophia knocked on my bedroom door around midnight and climbed into my bed like she used to when she was little. She started talking in this small voice about the first time Mr. Mitchell touched her shoulder during a writing conference, how it seemed normal at first, but then his hand stayed there too long. She showed me her wrist and I saw faint purple marks I'd somehow missed before, bruises from where he'd grabbed her when she tried to leave his classroom once. I took photos with my phone while tears ran down both our faces, trying to stay calm even though I wanted to scream. She told me about how he'd run his fingers through her hair while reading her poetry, how he'd pull her close to look at his computer screen, always finding reasons to touch her. Josh must have heard us talking because he appeared in the doorway looking exhausted and said he couldn't sleep either, that he kept having nightmares about what might have happened if he hadn't set up that fake profile. He sat on the floor by my bed and admitted he'd been watching Mr. Mitchell for weeks before creating the account, following him and Sophia, terrified something worse would happen. I realized both my kids needed professional help, not just Sophia, and made a mental note to call those therapists first thing in the morning. Around 7 a.m., my phone rang, and it was Bailey Acosta's mother, a woman I'd never met, but who said her daughter had been getting similar messages from Mr. Mitchell all last year when she was a freshman. Bailey had been too scared to tell anyone, but after hearing about the arrest, she wanted to help our case, wanted to make sure he couldn't do this to anyone else. Her mother's voice cracked as she described finding her daughter crying over her phone late at night, messages from a teacher that crossed every line. She gave me her number and said Bailey would testify if needed, that they had screenshots saved from before Bailey blocked him on everything. I'd barely hung up when an email came through from the teachers' union representative with a formal letter attached, threatening defamation lawsuits if we made any public statements about the case. My hands shook as I forwarded it to Brandon Velez, who called back within minutes saying it was just an intimidation tactic and to ignore it completely, that they were scared because they knew their member was guilty. He said unions always try this when one of their teachers gets caught and it never goes anywhere, especially with the evidence we had. By noon, screenshots of Mr. Mitchell's arrest were all over Instagram and Snapchat, with students posting their own stories and theories about what happened. Some kids were defending him, calling him the best teacher they ever had, saying we were ruining an innocent man's life. Sophia saw the posts on her phone and started sobbing, running to the bathroom where I heard her throwing up again. Josh went online trying to defend his sister without revealing her identity, but the rumors were spreading faster than anyone could control. The speculation got wilder with each share, some saying Mr. Mitchell had been with multiple students, others claiming it was all made up for attention. That Thursday was our first therapy appointment, and the therapist, a woman with kind eyes and a calm voice, let Sophia talk at her own pace about everything. Sophia told her how Mr. Mitchell called her his muse, said she inspired his own writing, that great literature always came from forbidden love like theirs. The therapist explained how predators use these exact tactics, making victims feel special and chosen, twisting normal feelings into something secret and shameful. She said Mr. Mitchell had followed a textbook pattern of grooming, from the special attention to the isolation to the threats about grades and college. The therapist gave us worksheets about recognizing manipulation and said this would be a long process, that healing doesn't happen overnight. Later that week, the detective called with news that made everything worse, saying he'd found complaints from Mr. Mitchell's previous district that were never properly investigated. There was a pattern going back at least 4 years, 3 different schools, always freshman or sophomore girls, always the same behavior that got explained away or covered up. The detective said one girl's parents had tried to press charges, but the district convinced them to let Mr. Mitchell resign quietly instead, protecting their reputation over protecting students. This information would help our case, but it made me sick knowing how many girls had suffered before someone finally stopped him. Monday morning, Principal Nelson called me into his office where Josh was already waiting, saying they had to hold a disciplinary hearing about the fake profile, even though Josh had exposed a predator. The principal looked uncomfortable as he explained that violating internet safety policies still had consequences, that they couldn't ignore what Josh did even if his intentions were good. Josh sat up straight and said he'd do it again if it meant protecting his sister, that he'd accept whatever punishment they gave him. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, and the principal said Josh would probably get 2 weeks suspension, but nothing permanent on his record. That afternoon, Brandon Velez called with unexpected news, saying, Mr. Mitchell's attorney wanted to meet about a possible plea deal. The meeting happened 2 days later, but before we could even discuss the plea, Brandon got a call that changed everything, because Instagram had finally responded to the subpoena with their data dump. He opened his laptop right there in the conference room and started scrolling through pages of access logs showing Mr. Mitchell had looked at student profiles hundreds of times from his home computer. The timestamps showed him checking profiles at 2 in the morning, during school hours, even Christmas Day when normal people are with their families. Brandon counted over 400 separate instances of him viewing Sophia's photos alone, plus dozens of other freshmen and sophomore girls from the school. The digital trail went back 2 years and included screenshots he'd taken of their beach photos, dance pictures, anything showing skin that he'd saved to his personal devices. Meanwhile, Sophia had started seeing a new therapist who specialized in grooming victims, and during her 3rd session, something finally clicked for her. She came home that day with red eyes but seemed lighter somehow, telling me the therapist helped her understand that none of it was real love or even real friendship. The therapist explained how predators pick vulnerable kids, make them feel special, then slowly push boundaries while making the victim think they're participating willingly. Sophia started writing in a journal that night, filling page after page with everything she'd been too scared to say out loud for months. 3 days later, we sat in a courtroom for the protective order hearing where the judge reviewed all the evidence Brandon had compiled. Mr. Mitchell sat at the other table with his lawyer, wearing a suit but looking smaller than I'd ever seen him, not making eye contact with anyone. The judge read through the messages, the access logs, the testimony from multiple students, taking her time with each piece of evidence. She granted the protective order immediately, stating Mr. Mitchell couldn't come within 500 feet of Sophia, Josh, or the school property. His lawyer tried to argue it would make it impossible for him to work, but the judge cut him off, saying that should have been considered before inappropriate contact with minors. That same week, Bailey's courage in speaking up inspired 3 more girls to come forward with their own stories about Mr. Mitchell. One sophomore showed messages where he'd offered her extra credit for private tutoring sessions at his apartment. Another freshman had screenshots of him commenting on her Instagram posts at midnight with heart emojis and calling her mature for her age. The third girl, a junior now, said he'd been messaging her since she was 14, always careful to delete the conversations, but she'd taken photos with her phone. Brandon said each new witness made the case stronger, turning what could have been dismissed as one kid's vendetta into clear evidence of a pattern. The school had to deal with Josh's fake profile violation, even though he'd exposed a predator, scheduling his disciplinary hearing for Monday morning. Josh sat straight in his chair while they explained he'd get 2 weeks of in-school suspension for violating internet safety policies. Principal Nelson looked uncomfortable the whole time, and when the formal part ended, he walked Josh to the door and quietly thanked him. Josh accepted the punishment without complaint, saying he knew there would be consequences, but he'd do it again to protect his sister. During his suspension, he'd sit in a small room doing his assignments while the rest of the school went to regular classes. The next development came when Mitchell's lawyer tried to go on the offensive, filing motions claiming Josh was a troubled teen who'd targeted a beloved teacher. The lawyer painted Josh as failing English, angry about his grades, manipulating the situation to get revenge on a teacher who'd held him accountable. Brandon shut it down fast with the mountain of evidence, pointing out Josh's solid B average, no disciplinary history, and the fact that Mitchell had sent inappropriate messages to what he thought was a 13-year-old. The judge dismissed the motion immediately and warned Mitchell's lawyer about making baseless accusations against a minor. After that hearing, the school district called an emergency meeting to implement new policies about teacher-student interactions. They created rules about closed-door meetings, required windows in all classroom doors, banned teachers from social media contact with students, and made reporting training mandatory for all staff. Teachers had to attend workshops about recognizing grooming behavior, understanding power dynamics, and their legal obligation to report suspicious behavior. Some teachers grumbled about the new rules, but most understood why they were necessary after what happened. 2 months after everything exploded, Sophia felt ready to return to the school part-time with a modified schedule. She'd go for morning classes only, avoiding Mitchell's old classroom and any triggering locations like the hallway where they used to meet. The counselor Zoe set up a safe space in her office where Sophia could go whenever she felt overwhelmed. Every day, Zoe would check on her between classes, making sure she was handling the stress of being back. Other kids stared sometimes and whispered, but Sophia's real friends formed a protective circle around her. During this time, I started attending a parent support group for families dealing with similar trauma. The first meeting had 8 other parents, all with kids who'd been groomed or assaulted by teachers, coaches, or other authority figures. We shared resources about therapists, lawyers, how to navigate the school system, how to support our kids without smothering them. One mom had been fighting her case for 3 years. Another dad just found out last week about his son's coach. The group made me realize how common this was, and how many predators never faced consequences. The forensic tech working our case called with more disturbing news after analyzing Mitchell's personal computer. He'd saved hundreds of photos from student social media accounts in organized folders, labeled with their names and grades. Some folders went back 4 years to his previous school, showing this behavior started long before he came to our district. The tech found deleted messages, recovered search histories showing him looking up students' addresses, and evidence he'd created fake accounts to follow kids who'd blocked him. Every new piece of evidence made it clear this wasn't a mistake or misunderstanding, but calculated predatory behavior that had been going on for years. The school board meeting came 2 weeks later, and the room was packed with angry parents demanding answers about how this could happen for so long. I stood at the microphone with my prepared statement, my hands shaking as I talked about the need for better supervision and mandatory reporting without mentioning Sophia's name directly. The board members nodded and took notes while promising a complete review of all safety protocols and teacher supervision policies, but their words felt empty after what my family had been through. Outside the meeting, students had already started organizing, and the school split into 2 camps almost overnight. Some kids made support ribbons for victims and organized a rally in the parking lot with signs saying they believed survivors, while other students circulated a petition defending Mitchell and claiming he was framed by jealous students. The division made everything harder for Sophia, who had to walk past both groups every morning, seeing classmates argue about whether her trauma was real or not. Josh surprised me by signing up for the district's peer counseling program, where they trained students to recognize warning signs of predatory behavior. He spent his afternoons learning about grooming tactics and how to help other kids feel safe reporting uncomfortable situations with adults. The counselor running the program told me Josh was channeling his protective instincts in a healthy way, turning his guilt about not acting sooner into something that could help other students. Meanwhile, Sophia started working with her therapist on writing a victim impact statement, spending hours getting her thoughts on paper about how Mitchell's actions affected her life. The therapist said writing helped victims reclaim control over their own narrative, and I could see Sophia getting stronger with each draft she completed. Brandon called me 3 weeks into the case with frustrating news about the plea negotiations completely stalling out. Mitchell was refusing to admit any wrongdoing, and his lawyer was pushing for dismissal, which meant Brandon had to prepare for a full trial that could drag on for months. The prosecutor started gathering more evidence, including Sophia's medical records from the past year, which painted a disturbing picture of the physical toll the grooming had taken. The pediatrician's files showed she'd lost 15 pounds since September and developed severe stomach problems that the doctor had originally thought were just anxiety about school. Her attendance records showed she'd been absent or left early from the school 23 times, always on days she had Mitchell's class, and the nurse had documented multiple visits for nausea and headaches. The therapist recommended that Josh and Sophia start attending joint sessions to work through their complicated sibling dynamic after everything that happened. Josh had been carrying guilt about not protecting his sister sooner, while Sophia felt ashamed that her brother had to expose her secret, and they needed professional help to rebuild their relationship. During their first session, Josh broke down crying and apologized for not acting faster, but Sophia told him she wasn't ready to talk about it yet. The therapist worked with them slowly, helping Josh understand that his guilt wasn't helpful, and teaching him to stop blaming himself for not recognizing the signs earlier. News about Mitchell's wife came through the gossip network at the school before it hit official channels. She'd filed for divorce and gotten a restraining order after learning about the additional victims who'd come forward, and she'd moved out of their house within days of his arrest. Even his own family couldn't deny the evidence anymore, and kids at the school said they'd seen her crying in the grocery store parking lot. The civil lawsuit negotiations with the school district started 6 weeks after Mitchell's arrest, with lawyers going back and forth about settlement amounts. The district wanted to avoid a public trial that would expose their failure to protect students, so they offered to settle out of court with money for the twins' therapy and college funds. Our lawyer pushed for more, arguing the district had ignored warning signs and failed to supervise Mitchell properly. And after weeks of negotiations, they agreed to a settlement that would cover years of therapy plus educational expenses. The criminal case dragged on for 3 months, with Mitchell's lawyer filing motion after motion trying to get evidence thrown out or charges reduced. Brandon kept us updated weekly, explaining each legal maneuver and preparing us for the possibility of going to trial if Mitchell wouldn't accept a deal. The other victims' families were getting frustrated too, with Bailey's mom calling me regularly to vent about how the system seemed designed to protect predators more than victims. Finally, after 3 months of legal battles and with mounting evidence from multiple victims, Mitchell's lawyer convinced him to accept a plea deal. He'd serve 5 years in prison, register as a sex offender for life, and never be allowed to teach or work with minors again. Brandon called me with the news on a Tuesday afternoon, and I sat in my car crying with relief that Sophia wouldn't have to testify in court. The plea deal meant admitting guilt to multiple counts of inappropriate conduct with minors, though Mitchell still refused to apologize or show any remorse for what he'd done. The sentencing hearing happened 2 weeks later at the county courthouse downtown, and I sat in the front row gripping Josh's hand while Sophia stood at the podium with her typed pages shaking in her hands. She started reading about how Mitchell stole her trust and made her feel dirty for things that weren't her fault, her voice cracking on every other word, but she kept going even when Mitchell's lawyer objected twice. Josh squeezed my hand harder when she described the nightmares and the way she couldn't eat for weeks, and I watched Mitchell sitting there in his orange jumpsuit looking bored like this was wasting his time. The judge let her finish every word, nodding as she explained how scared she'd been to tell anyone because Mitchell said he controlled her future, and when she finally sat down, the whole courtroom was silent except for Bailey's mom crying in the back row. Mitchell stood up for his statement and spent 15 minutes blaming Josh for entrapment, the school for not supervising properly, and even suggested the girls had misunderstood his mentoring style. The judge's face got harder with each excuse Mitchell made, especially when he claimed he was the real victim here because his career was ruined over what he called a misunderstanding. She interrupted him twice to remind him this was supposed to be about taking responsibility, but he just kept talking about how unfair the whole situation was to him personally. When she pronounced the sentence, she added an extra year specifically because of his complete lack of accountability and told him he was exactly the kind of predator parents feared most. The local news station filmed us leaving the courthouse, and by that night our story was everywhere, with my phone buzzing constantly with messages from other parents sharing their own experiences with teachers who'd crossed lines. 3 different moms from Josh's school reached out saying they'd always felt something was off about Mitchell, but never had proof, and one dad said his daughter had switched out of Mitchell's class last year, but wouldn't say why. Over the next few weeks, Sophia started going back to the school for half days with a modified schedule that let her avoid Mitchell's old classroom completely. Her other teachers worked with her to catch up on missed assignments without pressure, letting her turn things in whenever she felt ready, instead of following strict deadlines. The school counselor checked on her between every class and gave her a pass to leave any room if she felt overwhelmed, which she used a lot those first few days back. Josh's suspension ended the same week, and he returned to regular classes with a completely different attitude about school and rules and authority. He started researching colleges with criminal justice programs and spent his lunch periods in the library reading about victim advocacy and how the legal system works. His grades actually went up because he suddenly cared about his future in a way he never had before, like he'd found his purpose through all this pain. The school held a mandatory assembly about appropriate boundaries where they brought in experts to talk about grooming and reporting concerns. I volunteered to help organize it and watched from the back as several kids approached the counselors afterward, with their own stories about uncomfortable situations with adults. The principal told me later that 5 different students reported concerning behavior from various adults in their lives, and 2 were serious enough to involve the police immediately. Time kept moving even when it felt like we were stuck in that horrible moment, and about 6 months after everything started, I was making dinner when I heard something I hadn't heard in forever. Sophia was actually laughing, really laughing, on the phone with someone from her therapy group, who understood what she'd been through without needing explanations. She'd made this friend named Jasmine, whose piano teacher had done similar things, and they texted constantly about everything from homework to bad TV shows to the weird things people said when they found out about the abuse. That same week, Josh got an acceptance letter for a summer program training peer counselors at the district level, where kids who'd been through trauma could help other students recognize warning signs. The program director said Josh's experience and his protective instincts made him perfect for helping others, though he'd need to complete training on maintaining boundaries while supporting peers. Bailey started a group text with Sophia and the other girls who'd come forward about Mitchell, and they checked in with each other every few days. They'd send silly memes on bad days and celebrate small victories like getting through a whole week of school or sleeping through the night without nightmares. Bailey's mom told me the support network helped her daughter more than months of individual therapy because these girls really understood each other's specific pain. My boss had held my position while I took emergency leave to deal with everything, and returning to work actually helped create some normal routine in our chaos. I'd leave after making sure both kids got to the school, spend 8 hours focusing on spreadsheets and meetings instead of trauma and court dates, then come home to help with homework like any other parent. The regular schedule gave all of us structure we desperately needed, proof that life could eventually feel manageable again, even if it would never be exactly the same as before. The art therapy started when Sophia's regular therapist brought in watercolors one Tuesday and asked her to paint whatever came to mind without talking. Sophia grabbed the darkest colors first, making angry black swirls that covered half the paper, then slowly added some blues and purples around the edges. The therapist watched her work for 20 minutes without saying anything, just letting her paint, and when Sophia finally put the brush down, she was crying, but also looked lighter somehow. After that session, Sophia asked if she could keep painting at home, so I bought her a whole set of acrylics and canvases from the craft store. She'd spend hours in her room painting these abstract pieces full of dark colors that gradually got brighter toward the edges, and her therapist said it was helping her process things that words couldn't reach yet. Josh would sometimes sit with her while she painted, not talking, just being there, and I'd find them like that when I brought up snacks. The report cards came in March, and both kids had made honor roll, which honestly shocked me given everything they'd been through that year. Josh had gotten straight A's except for a B+ in chemistry, and Sophia had managed all A's and B's despite missing so much school during the worst of everything. Their teachers had been incredibly understanding, letting them make up work and take tests when they felt ready, but the kids had pushed themselves hard to catch up. I cried looking at those report cards because 6 months earlier, I wasn't sure either of them would even finish the school year. The district announced new policies at the April school board meeting, requiring background checks for all staff every 2 years instead of just at hiring. They also implemented rules about teachers meeting with students, no more closed doors during one-on-one sessions, and mandatory windows in all classroom doors that couldn't be covered. Every teacher had to complete training about appropriate boundaries and recognizing grooming behaviors, with refresher courses required annually. Mitchell's case had exposed major gaps in their supervision, and they were scrambling to fix them before more parents filed lawsuits. We took a trip to the coast in May, our first real vacation since everything exploded, just the 3 of us at a rental house near the beach. The first day, Josh and Sophia barely left the house, watching TV and eating junk food. But by the second day, they were actually playing in the waves like little kids again. I watched them splash each other and build sand castles, and for a few hours we felt like a regular family on vacation, instead of survivors of something terrible. We stayed 5 days, and by the end, both kids had some color back in their faces, and were actually laughing at stupid jokes again. Sophia decided to speak at a survivor awareness event in June after Bailey told her about it, using just her first name to protect her privacy. She worked on her speech for weeks with her therapist, practicing in front of the mirror until she could get through it without breaking down. The day of the event, there were about 50 people there, mostly teenage girls and their parents, and Sophia's voice only shook a little as she described the warning signs she'd missed. She talked about how predators make you feel special and were chosen, how they separate you from your support system, how they convince you that what's happening is normal or even romantic. Josh started seeing someone in July, a girl from his peer counseling program who knew our whole story and didn't care. Her dad had been arrested for fraud when she was younger, so she understood having your family in the news and dealing with public shame that wasn't your fault. They'd study together at our kitchen table, and I'd catch them holding hands or sharing inside jokes, and seeing Josh trust someone enough to let them close made my chest tight with relief. He'd been so focused on protecting everyone else that I worried he'd never let anyone protect him, but this girl seemed to get him in a way that helped. Sophia hit her 1-year therapy mark in September and read a poem she'd written about surviving at her session while Josh and I watched. The poem talked about shadows that used to own her words, and how she was taking them back one syllable at a time, about painting her pain into colors that didn't have names yet. Her therapist had tears in her eyes when Sophia finished reading, and Josh reached over to squeeze his sister's hand, while I tried not to completely lose it in that little office. Looking at my kids now as we head into the holidays, I see them doing more than just surviving. They're actually starting to live again. Josh wants to study criminal justice in college and help other kids who've been through trauma, while Sophia's considering art therapy as a career path. They still have bad days where Josh checks on Sophia constantly, or where Sophia can't handle being in certain parts of the school, but those days are getting fewer. Sometimes I think about that day in Principal Nelson's office when Josh risked everything to protect his sister. How messy and scary and complicated it all was, but I'm grateful he trusted his gut and took action. Both my kids are here and healing and even happy sometimes, which is more than I dared hope for during those first dark months after everything came out. And that's the story done. Appreciate you hanging out with me, it's always a chill time. See you again if you pop back.